Where will technology take you?
How will you communicate?
Manage your money.
Get your music.
You'll have games.
But how will you play them?
What will you have in your briefcase?
Or in your car.
Or on your body?
Is there any limit to how wired you can be?
Every day, technology changes.
You have questions?
So do we. That's why we're here.
Tech TV.
Tech TV. It's what's next.
Hi, if you're watching this video, you must be at least a little curious about what's inside a PC. Or maybe you finally decided it's time to build your own. Well, good for you. It's fun, and if we can do it, anyone can. Thanks for purchasing Tech TV's How to Build Your Own PC, part of our series with Q Publishing, the leader in computer education. I'm Leo Laporte.
And I'm Patrick Norton. Now, we're the host of Tech TV's The Screensavers. Now, every night we help people just like you to solve their computer problems.
As we like to put it, Patrick, we're saving the world one computer at a time. But right now, we're going to show you how to build one of these things. Now, over the next hour or so, we're going to show you step by step how to find the right parts to build a PC and then how to put them together.
We're also going to show you our expert building tips and tricks, and we're going to try to demystify the whole process to make building a PC easy enough for anybody, even us, to understand. That's what we do best.
And as if that weren't enough, as we go along, you can find more information and extra tips and tricks at our website, techtv.com/buildapc. You ready, Patrick?
I was born ready.
All right. Let's start a little bit by talking about the advantages and more importantly, even disadvantages of building your own computer.
Is there an advantage to building your own computer?
There's an advantage,
Okay.
but maybe I better start with the disadvantages to scare anybody off who hasn't really thought about this. You do want to think about it first, because there are some things that your own home-built computer is not great at. For instance, there are issues about compatibility. When you buy a pre-built computer, the manufacturer has tested all the parts to make sure they all work together and they all work with the software. You're combining parts of your own choice. Some parts may never have ever been combined together before. So there could be compatibility issues between the parts themselves and the software you'll be running. Also cost. I think a lot of people think they're going to save money by building their own. It's not a guarantee.
Yeah. Dell, Compaq, Micro, all these big giant companies, they buy parts in the millions. You buy one. Now, if you're careful, you can think you're saving money, but chances are when you do the math later on, you're doing this because you want to, not because you're going to save big cash.
Another problem is you're not going to get tech support on this stuff. You might get on individual parts, you might get on the software, but as soon as you say, well, the Framit soundboard doesn't work with the Megalodon video card, who are you going to call? There's no one number to call. There's no one person who assembled the whole computer.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do your own tech support. But hey, that's what you got into this for, right? To learn how to
Do it yourself.
do it yourself, right?
There's also, of course, the issue of things like skin knuckles.
We have the
of
scars
course,
to prove it.
Yes.
Now, the advantages are many. And I don't want to discourage you completely because, first of all, you're going to get exactly the computer you want. You specify every single bit and piece of that thing. You're going to get a computer that matches your needs, your wants, your desires.
And you know what? Best part? Bragging rights on your friends.
Let's get building. Come on. First of all, let's talk about preparing your work area, getting the right tools together. And, well, we'll start with the work area. I have to tell you, I have worked in all kinds of conditions building PCs, everything from the dining room table to my kids' bedroom floor.
Dorm rooms,
dorm
garages.
rooms. You've done it everywhere, too.
As you said, but this is an ideal, perfect fantasy.
But it's so nice.
Yeah.
If you can get something like this, it would be great. First of all, it's clean. You don't want to get any fuzz or dirt or lint in your PC.
It's well lit.
Really nice because a lot of this stuff is tiny, and when you get old like me, not you, Patrick, but when you get old like me, it's hard to see a lot of the little fine lines and the lettering and stuff. So
it's dry.
Look how clean it is, isn't it? Dry is important. Why? Because computers don't like wet. And this is one that you might not think of. If you can do this, it really is great, especially in dry climates. No carpet.
Static electricity.
Watch.
No, 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 no. Stop.
The worst thing for your computer is static electricity. It doesn't hurt too much when I touch Patrick's nose.
Speak for yourself.
But those thousands and thousands of volts going into those tiny integrated circuits can literally break them, fry them. So no static electricity. Here's a little tip. If you'd have to work on a carpet, little trick.
Oh, that.
You put a little
spritz thing.
a cap full of fabric softener in a spritz bottle of water, and you spritz the carpet. And the fabric softener actually kills the static electricity.
Sledgehammers aside, you don't need that many tools to build a PC.
It's really pretty simple.
Yeah.
We've actually got kind of more than you need here.
It's all sort of, more than you need. It's all neatly arrayed. Container for small parts. We, of course,
This is great.
We can build computers all the time, so we've been saving small parts our entire adult lives.
What else do we need?
Second thing's most important, you're going to need a Phillips screwdriver, ladies and gentlemen.
One of the plus screwdrivers.
Yeah.
Patrick is an old-fashioned kind of guy, likes to use the manuals. I personally, I'm lazy. I like to use an automatic screwdriver. I think it does, a power tool is always good, isn't it? And it does, what's nice is it does the work for you. So you can screw it in. Now, Patrick's one disagreement with these, and I think you're right, is you can over torque. You can overdrive a screw. So rather than using your, your battery-powered super duper screw buster and portable drill, maybe one of these in an inexpensive kind of a screwdriver.
Right.
This is not going to have so much torque that can actually hurt anything.
Even if you're not using that, you don't
You can do it by hand. No.
Be gentle.
So these are all the must-have. Any other must-haves?
You know what? You're going to be trimming, you're going to be cutting, you might be playing around. A box cutter, a standard utility knife. Ladies and gentlemen, be careful with it. Kids, don't use one without the permission of your parents.
Yeah.
If you cut
18 or
yourself,
older.
don't blame me.
Absolutely.
Now, we also want to talk about something. These are probably shouldn't be on the optional list, but some kind of needle nose pliers or
Very
hemostats,
handy,
something you can
very,
reach in.
very handy.
You're putting jumpers in, you're pulling cables in and out.
I drop screws all the time
Yeah.
into the case, and this is probably oftentimes the only way you can get in there and pull the screw out. And you don't want to leave any loose metal inside your case. Not only does it sound bad when it rattles around, it can short out stuff. What are these things?
These are zip strips. Now, you're going to have a lot of cables inside your computer. Now, you might do it just to make it look neat and tidy, or you might do it because the less cable sprawl you have, the easier airflow will be inside the system. You wrap this around the group of cables, you insert neatly so, and you...
These are so handy, and they're inexpensive. I have some, I just keep them around all the time. Even outside your computer, all that massive cables you have behind your desk, these can be very handy for organizing them and keeping them in shape.
Yes,
so there are the tools, both the necessary and the nice to have. You don't need a sledgehammer, kids, honest. The tools you'll need are a parts container, a Phillips screwdriver, a box cutter is handy, needle nose pliers, and zip strips to tie everything down and keep it nice and neat. Now, this is the fun part. Let's go shopping. It's good. It's fun. I love doing this.
Before you run out with your cash and your credit cards and your hot little hands burning a hole in your pocket, whatever it is, mixing metaphors, you need to do your homework.
Well, that's absolutely right, because you don't want to buy more than you need or less than you need. So take some time to spec out your new PC. What does that mean, to spec it out?
Basically, decide on the list of specifications defining the contents of your PC.
How do we know?
It's the parts list.
How do we get a parts list?
Okay, you can go to the screensavers. We have a list of like our favorite sub 1,000 PCs, even cheaper. You can look at all those expert sites like Anantech and Tom's Hardware, all that good stuff.
Magazines will tell you.
Magazines will tell you. Talk to your friends, see what they're using. Basically, come up with a list of parts. The motherboard, the processor, the graphics card, the audio card, the case, the memory, all this good stuff. You want to check your list. Even if you don't maybe use our list of parts, check your list against our list. Make sure you have one of each, because if you don't have all the parts you need, there's nothing worse than building a PC, getting home, and going to go online and realize you don't have a modem.
Right. Or buying more parts than you need, or buying a part that doesn't work with another part, things like that. Very important. You can get everything you need, at least the beginning of the research, online here.
Yeah.
The PC breaks down into a few simple components. You're going to start with your CPU. That's the processor, the brains of the computer. You also need memory chips. That's where this data that you're working on and the programs you're running are stored while the CPU is working on them. What else are we going to put in there?
Well, you're going to need a video card. That takes the pictures. It basically turns the zeros and ones the PC needs feeds into the pretty pictures you look at on the screen.
That video is not the only card. You're going to need a sound card as well if you want to hear stuff. And you're probably going to want to get some fans for the processor to keep them cool.
That's a big one.
You're going to want speakers for the sound card, a power supply, and a case. They usually come together, but that's to stick everything in.
Right.
And then finally, the most important, actually it's not finally, but the most important part, which is the motherboard. What is the motherboard?
Okay, the motherboard, it's kind of like, you know how you have a frame for a car and you bolt all the parts onto the frame?
The chassis, yeah.
The chassis. Well, you know what? Your case is kind of the chassis, but the real heart of your computer is the motherboard. It's where your processor, your memory, all of your cards, all of your hard drives, everything connects to the motherboard. It's the heart of your machine.
The biggest circuit board in your computer. Sometimes they call it the main board. You'll also need storage, the hard drive, the floppy drives, the CD drives. And then if you want to get online, you'll need either a modem or a network interface card. You don't have to do all that research if you don't want to. Just go to our website, techtv.com/build-a-PC, and we've got a list of the components we're going to use in my PC and Patrick's PC, so you can do exactly what we recommend. But first, let's recap. Basic PC components you're going to need to buy include the central processing unit, or CPU, your RAM, your memory chips. You're going to have a video card so you can see things, a sound card so you can hear things. You'll need speakers to go with the sound cards, fans to keep everything cool. You got to have a power supply and a case to hold all of this stuff. And of course the motherboard and storage, floppy, hard drives, optical drives like a CD-ROM. If you want to get online, you're also going to need a modem or a network interface card.
You ready, Leo?
I'm ready, let's go!
Time to put it all together. We're going to start with the PC's core components. The CPU, the motherboard, the memory, and of course, the case and the power supply. You put them all in.
It's like my birthday here. Look at all this stuff. I'm so excited. This really is the fun part. We're going to start with the case. You've got to get the case together before you can put all these nice pieces into it. We're going to start by opening up the case so we can, get inside. We have the power supply here. Let me get that out of the way, and I'm going to turn the case around so you can see what we have to remove here. We've got to remove these screws that are holding the panels on so we can get inside the case. This is where Patrick, I'm going to have a big advantage with my power screwdriver. I love this thing. We just zip these off. Go ahead, Patrick, and do yours. Look and see, you often don't need to remove all the screws. In fact, you probably don't want to remove all the screws, just enough to get into the case. In this particular case, there are 3 screws holding on each panel. All right, so you beat me. Don't show off. And once you get the panel off, you'll be able to see inside. That is an empty case. There's nothing in it, not even a power supply. Here's where you've got your mayonnaise lid or your screw container. That's going to come very handy. Don't lose these screws. Put them somewhere safe. Put the case panel aside because you're not going to need to put that back until you're all done with the system.
Now, when you're looking at this, when you buy your case, right, make sure this is the area where the power supply goes if it's not mounted in there. What I want you to do when you're looking at that, make sure the power supply doesn't cover up the area where you're going to put the motherboard in. You know why? It makes it hard to get the motherboard in and out. You got to pull the power supply in and out anytime you do anything. We want you to be able to put the power supply in, forget about it, then put the rest of the components in your system. So you ready to put a power supply in?
I'm doing that right now. Many cases these days come with power supplies already attached, and you oftentimes get your case that way. We wanted to show you how to put in a power supply because sometimes you want to upgrade the power supply. Inexpensive cases often come with pretty bad power supplies, and since the power is what determines the reliability and the effectiveness of the machine, it's important to get a power supply that really has all the juice you need. You got to get that in just in the right spot. Am I doing it right there, Patrick?
Are you doing it?
Am I upside down?
You're upside down.
Look at that, see? By the way, on the other side of the power supply, these are all the connectors that are going to connect up to the motherboard and the peripherals. You don't have to worry about those, but if you have them outside the case, you've done it wrong. We know that much for sure. There, that fits nicely. And you'll see there are screw holes on the back of the power supply that match the holes on the back of the case. How you doing, Patty? You almost done? Show off? I knew it. Oh, man. I'm almost there.
Once you got the power supply, inside the power supply, once you've got it, you make sure the fan's clear, you got that plug on the back. Let me actually flip this around. So when it's in, it should look nice and neat and orderly. All these holes should match up as you put them in. This is where your power supply, your power cord goes in. This is the fan. It helps ventilate. Generally on your system, it'll either be a fan on the inside of the power supply or ventilating to the outside of the case that pulls air through the power supply, cools your system down. You see this spaghetti in my left hand? Don't ever pick up, don't do this.
Patrick,
It's
stop
bad
it.
for your system.
Stop it, Patrick.
Don't do that. Now,
You're
this,
a bad man.
I'm not a bad
You're
man.
torturing
I've done
that
a bad
case.
thing. There's a difference. All right. Now look at this spaghetti inside your case. Now, if you've done your job specking out your parts, there's something you're going to need. These little puppies, all right, these are the power supplies, these are the plugs. The Molex connectors, let me put one up. The Molex connectors, these go into your hard drive. You need, and your CD-ROM drives, all those stuff. You're going to need one of these things for each of the devices inside your computer.
All right, I got my power supply in. What do I do next?
It's time to put in the motherboard. Now, actually, we should say something. You got a decision. There's a crossroads you come to here.
We're at a crux.
A crux.
All
we have to
right.
make a decision. We hate making decisions. You might too. You got two options. You can either put the motherboard into the case and then put all the other stuff onto the motherboard, or if you're a little nervous about working inside of here, especially if you're working with an Athlon processor, they're a little sensitive. I've broken one or two putting them together.
3.
You might want to no more than 4. Now this is your motherboard. What you may want to do is actually put the processor and the heatsink and the fan on the motherboard, and then put the whole thing assembled inside the case.
There's another thing you're going to want to do before you get the motherboard in there, and that's kind of prepare the case by putting the motherboard risers onto the case. Let me just show you. This case, like most cases, has many different screw holes in a lot of different places that you could put it. Let me make sure you can see that.
So it's
that's because every motherboard has different positioning of the screws on here, so they give you a lot of compatibility, a variety for compatibility. Very, very important that you put the risers in exactly where there are going to be holes for them on the motherboard. What you really don't want to do is put in a riser somewhere where it's not going to actually go through a hole in the motherboard, but touch the back of the motherboard. It can actually short circuit the motherboard there, and you'll literally ruin your motherboard. So where are my risers? I need some risers. You got some there?
There should be a little plastic package. Normally, a lot of times, they actually tape it down on the inside of your case.
There it is.
First thing you do when you get your case home, you take it out of its big box, you look inside, there should be a little plastic bag full of parts.
The risers in my case are brass.
Right.
They have a threaded screw on one end, and then they have a little pentagonal hole at the top. That's what the screw is going to come into from the other side on the motherboard. You'll also see I have some paper washers in there. You're going to use the paper washers to insulate the motherboard against the risers. So the first thing to do is to kind of look at where the motherboard is going to go in the machine, and you're going to orient it so that the connectors are on the back plane of the machine. They've got to line up with these connector holes on the back plane of the machine. See, for the peripherals, can you see that right down there? So we're going to make sure that those line up with this, and that'll give me some idea of where to put the risers in, because I have holes in my motherboard where I want to screw in the motherboard to the risers. So match the holes on the motherboard to where you're going to put the risers on the case. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. You know what, though? There's different ways of doing it. My case came with these little, sometimes they're plastic. In this case, they're actually little metal bits. And these do the same thing as Leo's brass risers. They stand up the motherboard off the bottom of the case, and they give you something to actually screw the motherboard down in there. Again, I have the same kind of screws with little paper washers. And again, you know what? You laid it down there gently. You look at there, and you figure out where all these holes are, and you put one of these risers for each of those. The places you especially want to be most careful about is around here, the front of the cards, the PCI slots where you're mounting that down in there, because that's where you're going to be pushing these cards down in place. So make sure you use all of those.
Well, I've put in now 1, 2, 3, I'm going to put 6 risers in total, and I'm just going to see if I've matched up every riser with a hole on the motherboard. This is often difficult, and this is the tricky part here, is matching up the faceplate with the connectors you've got on the back of your motherboard. Sometimes they give you multiple faceplates. In this case, I've only got one faceplate. You may have to punch holes out. You see we have, it's not punched out here. That's because we don't need that. That's for extra USB ports. So if they're not punched out, you just take a screwdriver. May I borrow a flathead here real quickly? And you'll just pry off that little extra bit of metal so that you can get the connectors through there. We've already pried off all of the ones I need. This is going to be where my connectors for my sound card are going to go. This is a serial port. This is a printer port. We've got the mouse and the keyboard, the USB ports, and the extra serial ports here. So I'm just going to try to match those up.
Now these two things right here, these donuts, are actually where we're going to put screws in to tighten it down.
Donuts.
Donut, we like, you know, we're going to have donuts after we finish these. Sometimes, though, the little holes don't match up with the risers. Remember, we put the risers in to keep the motherboard off the bottom of the case. I don't want you, the last thing I want you to do, right, is to reach in here and start grabbing. This stuff all looks like handles. We got these little cans, they're called capacitors.
Handles.
They're not. You can rip them off. You can break them. What I want you to do is to work from the edge of the motherboard and to use the edge of the motherboard to slide it in place. Now, this is only going to work if you don't actually tighten down every screw on the motherboard as you go. Start them, turn them in a couple times. Get every screw that you want to put in there started first, and then and only then tighten them all down. Because if you tighten all 4 of these and you have to shift the motherboard over here, it's not going to work.
Before I screw in my motherboard, let me do this outside so everybody can see what I'm doing. You can do yours inside. I'm going to take my motherboard back out of the case. Oh yeah, I was almost done. But I'm going to let Patrick win this race because I really want you to see it when I drop in this AMD chip and put the heatsink on it and put in the RAM. This socket right here is very common for any socketed chip. It's called a ZIF, or Zero Insertion Force Socket. When I raise the lever, it's ready for inserting my processor. 2 of the corners are cut. That's important. Those 2 cut corners have to match the same cut corners on the processor itself. So this is the orientation that I'm going to put the processor in. You do not have to push the processor in. It's a zero insertion force. That means no force. You see that? It just popped right in. And then once it's in, and make sure it really is in solidly all the way around, close the lever, and that grips the processor so it can't fall out. All right, now that we got the processor in, it's time to put our cooler on. Today's processors run so fast, so hot, you cannot run them. You cannot use them, Patrick. You cannot use them, Patrick, without a fan on them. This is a fan. It's very common, typical fan. It's got heat sinks. These fins here draw the heat up. The fan then blows the heat away from the processor. It's going to keep it at a reasonable temperature. Notice this one has a little sticker on it that reveals some nice thermal material. This is going to make sure we have a good contact with the processor and that the heat is, because the processor is directly in contact with the sink, is drawn right into that heat sink. Now notice there's a lip on this fan. That lip has to go right on the lip on the socket. So I'm going to now angle it in. It's going right in on there. And by the way, they've got little rubber pads on the AMD. What are those pads for? They're to keep me from pushing this down right onto the glass.
You can even buy little copper spacers that actually work even more than the little rubber pads to help keep you from doing that.
See that? Now this is the critical juncture. We've got some pressure on the chip here. What we really want to do is get this second tab on without cracking the silicon of the chip. Look at that. It's on there. This isn't going anywhere. It's really down and tight. And I don't think I heard any chink sounds. So we now have a heatsink, and you want to look. You want to make sure it's making contact with the processor, because you got to draw the heat off that processor. If this thing doesn't cool the processor, it's going to burn up. Now the fan connects to the motherboard. So different fans work different ways. Sometimes the fan will connect to a power tail off the power supply itself. In this case, the fan connects to the motherboard on a connector that is really near the processor. Right there. The one that says CPU fan. That's pretty easy. Of course, your motherboard manual would tell you where, but we're real men. We don't look at the manual, right? And I'm just going to connect it there. That's going to make sure the fan turns. Now, please, folks, the first time you power up, look very carefully at that fan. Make sure it is turning. If it's not, immediately shut off the machine. Find out why it's not, whether the connection's bad or not.
You will fry an Athlon if it does not have a heat sink and it does not have a fan on it in seconds. 1,000 to 1,000 gone.
Who speaks from experience.
Yeah.
Now over here we have the DIMM slots, and this motherboard's nice. It has 3. There are different configurations. You can have as few as 1, as many as 4 or 5. 3's plenty, especially nowadays where you can get 512 megabytes on a single one of these memory sticks. This is the RAM, the memory we were talking about. This is where all the programs and the data are going to go while the computer's working on it. And the DIMM slots are numbered 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to fill the low number slot first. That's this slot closest to the processor. Again, check your motherboard manual to find out which slot you should fill first. It may not be closest to the CPU, although it usually is. These little white tabs, open them up. These are the clips that's going to hold it in place. I'll close the 2 that I'm not going to use so that you can see where I'm going. I'm going to put it right in this one. And you'll notice that every memory stick has little notches cut in it. That's so you can't put it in wrong. See that notch right there? That's going to go and match up with the notch on the slot. There's no way to put it in wrong. In fact, I have to orient it this way. Slide it down gently into the guides. here and right here. See how much easier this is to do when it's not in the case? It's still kind of tricky. There we go. Whoops. There we go. And then you're going to gently, without trying not to torque the chip, I'm going to push this down, and these clips are going to come up, holding in place. But you got to push a little bit of force. Try not to torque it. There we go. That one's in there, and that one's in there. And you'll know when it's in well. First of all, these white clips will be exactly as the other ones are that are already closed, and it'll feel firm and nice in there. That is good. Now, this is one stick. That's all we're going to put in this one, but you have room for expansion. It's good to know how to do this because down the road you may want to expand your processor. Now, there's other stuff that's going to go on this motherboard, our video card, our sound card, and my modem. But I'm not going to put that in yet. Now I'm ready to put the motherboard into the case. How you doing over there, Patrick?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. Now, Leo had this pretty fancy little tube of thermal grease. I got something even crazier. Ours, the one for this chip, came it came in a little syringe without a needle.
You're going to be tempted to put too much thermal grease on. You only need a little dab. You want a thin film of grease on there. You don't want a whole layer of, you're not icing a cake here.
Basically, it facilitates the contact between the heatsink on the chip and this heatsink. Some people actually, they take million grade sandpaper and they make this absolutely perfectly flat. We're normal people. We're just going to use a little bit of thermal grease to make that connection good.
My motherboard's in. I don't know how you're doing, but I'm feeling pretty good. In fact, this is the time when you really do want that manual because now's the time when you connect these fiddly bits. I hate doing this part. This is the part where you're almost guaranteed to skin a knuckle or tear some hair out. These are the reset switch, the power switch, the LEDs, the little light that lights up. It even says what's on here, that lights up when the hard drive is accessed or when the power is on. These have to be attached to connectors in your motherboard. I got another one down here. And they have to be attached to the right connector in your motherboard. It is usually an array of pins, there is in mine anyway, in the corner of your motherboard closest to the front of the machine, the bottom front of the machine. They're right down here. It's kind of hard to see. And they may even have silk screened the functions of these pins onto the motherboard. So if you've got a magnifying glass or reading glasses, you might be able to actually read it. It's a whole lot easier to find that information in the manual. Here's another one I'm going to connect. This is the PC speaker, you know, the one that goes beep. Not the one that plays music, but just the one that goes beep, beep, beep. You really do want to connect that. I know you think you don't need it. Here's where it does come in handy. When the computer first starts up, we'll talk about this a little bit later, it makes beep sounds to tell you how it's doing. And if it can't start up, it'll beep a certain number of times, and you can use that to diagnose what's wrong with the computer. So make sure you do connect your speaker in here. Boy, I wish I had my reading glasses. I can see it is silk screened on the motherboard, but it's kind of hard to see. Another thing that's kind of tricky is knowing which way to put it in, and sometimes the only way to figure that out is trial and error. There's a plus and there's a minus, and you just got to get the right way. They'll all be oriented the same way. Do you have any trick to that, Patrick?
You know something? I just turned my case around just so I could align my case with the little diagram that's inside the manual.
That. Aren't you
exactly.
Smart? I'm just putting it in as kind of an experimental way, and what we'll do is we'll turn it on. It won't inhibit the machine from starting by any means. It just either the light will light up or not. If it doesn't, easy enough. Again, one of the reasons you're not going to put the case back together and close it all up until you're sure you got everything done.
All right, well, Leo's wrestling with his case over there. Let's talk about what we're doing here. These are called muffin fans or biscuit fans or any of another affectionate things, these little round things.
Biscuit fans.
Biscuit fans. I'm just a biscuit under 250.
I'm getting hungry.
Let's take a look at this case for a second. Like Leo said, we're going to pull air in through here. We're going to suck in air through the bottom of the front of the machine, and we're going to blow it back out up here at the top of the machine out of the back. Now, you want to make sure that your fans align the right way to do that. This one's pretty nifty. They have a little plastic cage here for the front. And watch this. Now we have the fan and the cage, and this is all going to create a little sandwich right on the front of our machine. So we'll take a look at this one. This is pretty slick. I got to admit, I'm admiring this.
So you can put the label side out because that's the direction of the air, or label side in because that's the direction of the air.
So in this case, I'm going to be drawing air in. So we're going to lay that down in here, label side in, and we're just going to snap that in place. It all line up. Now we have a little fan sandwich there. The fan sandwich is going to go right up here in this case. Now you might actually have to bolt this thing down on the inside of your system. You might be using more screws for this. Again, be gentle. Remember how you took it off to put it back on.
This is nice because the wire trims right up through a slot in the muffin fan case there. So this connector is going to end up connecting to a power tail that comes off the power supply in the case. That's how it's going to drive it. Sometimes the fans will also connect directly to the motherboard. It's nice when you get fans that do, because then as I said earlier, their rotational speed can be monitored and you know the fan's working. The worst thing that can happen in a case is the fans die, the cooling dies, and the case overheats and you don't even know what's happened.
Now on the back side of this system, again, we told you we're going to put the label in. That's the direction of the air, Leo says. I trust him implicitly, and this one's going to be mounted over here where it's going to draw some more of this air over here and out the back of the fans.
This would be a good time to take a breather. You've installed the most critical and probably the most expensive components of your new PC. So go get some lemonade, pat yourself on the back. You're doing great. Here's a recap of what we've done so far. First, we've opened up our case. We've installed the power supply. We installed the motherboard, the big circuit board, and the CPU that went in the motherboard. We also attached a fan to the CPU to keep it cool. We installed our memory chips, our DIMMs. And finally, we connected all the switches and installed all the other fans we need inside the case.
I think it's time.
Are you ready?
I'm ready to start working on the drives.
All right, I'm ready to do drives too.
Okay, let's talk about 3.5 inch and 5 1/4 inch drive bays. Look inside of this system. The big wide critters that are usually at the top, those are 5 1/4 inch bays. The ones down here are 3.5 inch bays. Now you can fit, Leo's going to talk to you about this, you can actually fit a 3.5 inch drive into one of these 5 1/4 inch bays using a thing called rails.
I'm going to do it too.
He is. In my case, I'm going to take advantage of this drive cage down here, and my hard drive is going to slide into that, and we're going to bolt it down, and my floppy drive
You're
is going to go
doing it the
into
easy way. Well, I could put my hard drive in there, but I want to show you how to do the 3.5 inch drive and the 5 1/4 inch bay. One other thing on the floppy drives, actually on any drive that has to be accessed from the front, you'll notice that these cases have panels, all cases do, on the front to block unused bays. Your hard drive will sit behind one of these panels, but I'm going to have to open up this panel for the floppy drive.
One of the things you're going to do is take a look at this. Now you notice something, when we're working on these before, you couldn't see through the case. See how we've taken this, both sides of the case off. There's a reason we did that. When you're putting these drives in here, you know what? It sounds a little crazy. You got a couple holes on this side to fill in with screws. You got a couple holes on this side to fill in with screws. If you don't put them in on both sides, your drive goes like this. It also makes it go like this, and it can just...
No vibration. We want everything firm and solid. Now, I'm going to show you, remember I'm doing this the hard way. I'm going to show you how you could put a 3.5 inch drive in a 5 1/4 inch slot. And just like Patrick said, we don't want it rolling around. So we're going to put these mounting rails on the side of the hard drive. They're very easy to put on. You just line them up with the screw holes right here, and you'll put screws in to these and attach them firmly to it. And then that's going to give the drive the width it needs to be able to slide in to that 5 1/4 inch opening.
Notice, just for convenience, I taped my cables up here so they don't beat me in the face every 15 seconds when I turn it around.
We're going to set the jumpers, make sure that we have them jumpered properly. It's usually not a big deal when you're only putting in one drive, but if you have multiple drives, on the IDE channel, one drive is a master and one drive is a slave. In fact, while I got the drive out, let me show you where you would set that. You've got these jumpers on the back here, and if it's only one drive on the channel, well, then it'll be set up as master, as this one is. But if you're going to add a second drive down the road, you're going to have to re-jigger these jumpers, and it explains how to set it up here so that the second drive can be the slave drive. The computer will boot from the master drive, so that's the drive where your operating system is going to be. The secondary drive can hold data or anything else, but the operating system is going to be on the master drive. Same thing if you're putting in a CD. If there's only one CD and there's nothing else on that IDE channel, it can be the master. But if you have, let's say, a CD and a zip, or a CD and a CD recorder, one will have to be master and one will have to be slave. It's probably not a good idea to mix slower devices like CDs with faster devices like hard drives on the same IDE channel. You get two channels in each computer, separate the CDs and the, we'll show you that when we cable it, and the hard drive, so they don't slow each other down.
Ah, Leo.
Are you there?
You want to see something?
You feeling good?
I'm feeling good. Installing my CDRW over here. I'm going to move on to the DVD.
Let me show you. The rails are on the hard drive, and what it's just done is it's made this, you know, thin 3.5-inch hard drive into a fat 5.25-inch hard drive that's going to slide into the drawer space of the 5.25-inch slot right here very easily, and then I'm going to be able to screw it down. So it's just an adapter, basically. That means that that smaller drive can fit easily into the wider drive slot there. And once I get that in, I'm going to put in my CD. Because it's a hard drive, I didn't have to open up the front panel for this. That's just for the drives that need front access like this. A 3.5-inch floppy drive. I'm going to slide in there like that. And notice again, we want to make sure that those are flush with the front of the case. So you're going to kind of play with that so that it gets just flat there like that. And the same thing with the CD drive. And then once you've got that in there and lined up the way you want it, you can attach the screws and tighten them down. Another little finesse, kind of missed on this one. We matched the face, the front bezel of the DVD drive very nicely to the case, but this is kind of a little bit off color. It's a yellowish ivory instead of the modern gray beige, and that happens sometimes. But if you really want to have your case look good like a pro did it, you want to look very carefully when you do your shopping and get these tones to match exactly.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it looks just a little bit off.
That's really tough with silver cases and black plastic cases. They're not that common, but they're out there. I've actually seen a lot of the companies that use those. It's really tough to get a CD-ROM or a DVD drive that matches a silver or a black case. Sometimes you can find special components that are designed for that. A lot of guys, they just take it out very carefully. They cover over the important spots, like the spot where the LED or something is on the front, and they spray paint it.
They spray paint it, folks.
You can do that. Yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am with that, because if you get spray paint inside of the CDRW or the DVD drive, it's going to be useless.
It's not a good thing.
What you can do, though, is you can actually, and this is again, this is advanced. This is not something to take lightly. If you really want to have one of those silver or black cases, you can actually remove the plastic face off the front of that CDRW or DVD drive, spray paint it far away from anything you think is valuable, especially the inside of this computer, and take care of it that way. So how's it going? You got the drive rails.
It's good. I got the drive rails. One thing that I always do wrong, and don't forget this, is when you insert this drive, and I just did it now, make sure that the connector is facing the back of the case so you can attach the cables. Oops. So I just had to take this out. I put it in this way, and obviously I can't attach the cables here.
You know what? You might be tempted to grab your cables right now and start playing, because you got all this a floppy drive, the IDE, the drawer drive, CDRW.
I can connect them now, Pat. I'm all ready to connect them.
Don't do it, because you still got a bunch of stuff to put inside the system. Cables take up a lot of space. You're going to need that space to work inside this box and put the rest of the stuff in place.
I want to finish up, then we're going to show you how to install the expansion cards, and then we're going to put the data and the power cables in, and we're almost ready to turn this thing on. Let's recap real quickly. We've installed the various drives in our machines. Remember, leave the case open until you're finished, so if you have to make any changes, you can do it easily. There's no reason to close it all up right now. A good idea, if you've got drives that are smaller than the space you're putting them in, is to put mounting rails on those drives. Make sure on the motherboard all the jumpers are set correctly, the jumpers on the drives too, and always check the positioning of the cables so that they're oriented properly and the components are positioned well so they're flush with the front of the case. It looks nicer that way. One other tip, get components, if you at all can, get components that are going to match the case. It just gives it a nicer finished look, so all the colors are the same. Now, it's time to add our cards. This is the easiest thing to do, and it's something you'll probably be doing a lot of.
The good thing about these cards, you figure out how to put one in, you figured out how to put all of them
They're
in.
all pretty much the same. They may go on different slots, though. Currently, in today's PCs, you find 3 different kinds of slots. The AGP slot, this is an AGP card, and it's noticeable because it's got 2 notches in it. It's a short thing, and in fact, this one has a little extender, a little clip on it. The AGP card is currently used only for video cards. You'll also find PCI slots. That's the most common kind of slot. Most machines today have 4 or 5 PCI slots. They look like, the PCI cards look like this. And the PCI cards usually are sound cards, modems, network interface cards, things like that. The old cards are called ISA cards, ISA, for industry standard architecture. Those are longer cards, They're legacy. That means they're old-fashioned. In most cases, you don't want to use them if you don't have to. And in many motherboards, they don't even have ISA slots anymore. Patrick, you can show us what those slots look like right now.
As a matter of fact, almost no new motherboards actually have ISA slots inside of it. If we cut in tight here, the brown one that's set back here, that is going to be your AGP slot. The short white slots are PCI slots. Now, this one has an unusual little critter down at the side. If I'm not mistaken, this is an audio modem riser.
AMR slot. That's right.
And those use little proprietary, huge. Those do. It's basically on a. It uses your sound.
Now, to the case that's keeping the case for air and dust. In most cases, those will unscrew. This particular clip on for that. Here's in general how you put in cards. You remove the protector on the back of the board, slide it in, align it with the back of the case.
I got a question for you, Leo.
And I push, and it's in.
How do you know which PCI slot to use?
Well, you don't. If you look in your motherboard manual, it'll show which slots share interrupts or share resources and work out quite right. Move them around in the thing until you get everything so that it can work together.
Something I like to do, I've got an audio card right here. I tend to put the audio card in the PCI.
Do that, except
not always good.
I'm not going to put it at the very bottom because this motherboard has kind of an unusual feature. The USB and FireWire connectors attached to a header on the motherboard, and then the connectors themselves are going to go in the opening where a card would normally go. And I'm going to do that in the bottom because I like to have my connectors at the bottom of the case. So I'm going to do what you suggested, which is move the sound card to the second to the last slot and then use this last slot for this. This riser will connect right to some jumpers that are right on the motherboard. It'll be, if you have this kind of thing, it'll be in your manual. This actually comes with the motherboard. It's in addition to the existing USB connectors I have in the back here. I have an additional USB slot, and I have FireWire. You gotta love that. That's pretty nice. Oh no, that's not FireWire. That's just another USB connector.
Ah, well.
Oh, I got my hopes up for nothing.
Don't let it bother you, kid.
You're gonna put your modem in there?
Yeah, you know, normally you use either a modem or an Ethernet card. We went a little nutty and we put one of each in here. Like Leo says, you're going to line up the card with the slot. You're going to press it in. I like to give them an extra tap at the back to make sure it's firmly seated. You don't want to leave any of those threads or the pins exposed on there. Make sure everything's good and solid in there. Make sure it's tightened down, and you're ready to move on to the next step.
Boy, we loaded up this machine, didn't we? Okay, my sound card, like yours, is going to be the last PCI slot. I also have a modem and a network card. We are just wacky today, and I'm going to slide mine in here. And there we go. All right, I've got one opening that I am not using, so I'm going to push this back in to fill it up so that it doesn't occupy, that I don't leave any holes in there. But we're done. We're going to screw these things down and make sure they're solidly in there. And we've installed our additional cards. We got everything installed to the case. Now,
except for the cable.
Time to attach the cables.
Oh,
That's
boy.
right.
Lots and lots of cables. You know what? You're probably going to start with your data cables, and just for fun, you can start with your floppy drive cable. Where did that floppy drive cable go? I will look forward to the end of the floppy drive.
It's pretty much gone already, you know. I mean, there's not a lot of things that use a floppy. The only time you really are glad you have a floppy is when your machine won't start up and you've made a rescue disk, and you use that to boot up the machine so that you can figure out what's wrong and fix it, often reinstalling your operating system. So that's pretty much the last use of the floppy. Nobody uses, or very few people use floppies to transfer information anymore. That's just really not a common use. The zip has pretty much taken over for that. Did you put a zip drive in yours?
I did not put a zip drive in mine.
Yeah, I tell you, I like having a zip drive, and most of the computers that I build, I'll put a zip drive in. I just feel like it's a really useful thing to have for a backup and for transfer of data from one machine to the other. What's the matter?
79 cents a CDR disk for 650 megabytes of
you put a
storage
CD
versus
recorder in there.
$10 a disk for a zip drive. All right, let's take a look inside of this case. Your data cables are going to go, there's going to be one from the back of the hard drive, the floppy drive, the CDR drive, the DVD drive, and they're going to go into these. These two longer slots are your IDE slots. The shorter one right here is your slot for your floppy drive. Now, let's talk about cables for a second. Some cables are keyed. And when I say keyed, it's not like you're going to pull out your house keys and unlock it and put it back in together.
Well, it's kind of like that, though.
It's kind of like that. Take a look at this. These are the two ends of the floppy drive cable. Here's the first thing. Sometimes there's a little block here on the top. That's actually going to align with a particular side of that cable socket that you put it into. You also notice there's a blank pin there. Instead of being able to put a pin in there, it's covered up. That means it's only going to go in there one way. The other end's a little more complicated. This one actually, there's no blocked pins in here. There's no little slot for it, but what you do know one end from the other by looking at this little red cable on here. You're going to align that up with the floppy drive. Now let's talk about, for the rest of the cables in your system, your IDE drives, all of your hard drives. If you look at the back end of your hard drive, and you know, we should have left a hard drive out just to talk about this. You've got a hard drive here. You've got two things going on. Right here, back in most of your drives, there's going to be a slot for the IDE cable. Now, we talked about there being a little notch or a missing pin that helps you align it. But you know what really helps you align it? This 4-point Molex connector where your power goes. And when you're putting these in, I have what they call rounded cables. These are the slick high-end ones. But you notice something, even on the slick high-end cut ones, one side of this has a little red line on it right here. You see that little red line there? That is always going to be facing that power connector. So when I'm installing these, we keep the little red pin on the side with the power connector. And that also lines up. In this case, there happens to be a slot there too, and that makes it real easy. You don't have to remember which way it goes on.
Now, I've got a kind of a special problem here. You might have this problem too. Most CD-ROM drives have a third connector besides the power cable and the IDE connector. They have an audio connector.
Oh boy.
This is going to go from the audio connector on the CD to the sound card, and it's so we can listen to audio CDs. The audio that's played back from the audio CD just gets sent right to the sound card without the computer intervening in the middle. So that is going to go on the far edge. I usually put that in first on the CD because it's so far away from me. I want to put it in before I put in the other cables. You're not going to really be able to see me do this because it's so deeply buried within that computer there. And I'm going to slide this right in there and connect it. Then, now that I've got it connected there, and you can see this, I'm going to connect it to the sound card. There's a logical place to put it. The sound card is labeled so that you can, it'll say CD audio in, and there it is right there. I'm going to stick it right in there. And this little wire is just going to sit there in the middle of your case, getting in your way, but you need it if you want to listen to audio CDs on the system. Now, we have a variety of different cables here. Darcy went out and she went crazy. She bought us rounded cables. She bought us flat ribbon cables. We've got UDMA 33, UDMA 66, UDA1 MA 100 cables.
Could also be ATA 33, ATA 66, ATA 100.
What do I use, you might ask? Well, the rounded cables are a finesse just to make it look pretty inside and to keep airflow. I don't actually like to use rounded cables. I'm of the opinion ribbon cables are ribbon cables for a reason. They give you better separation and shielding of the signals. So I use ribbon cables. If you want to use rounded cables, you go right ahead. If you have an ATA 66 drive, you have to use these special ATA 66 cables. And if you look closely, the dark gray one is an ATA 66 cable. It has twice as many wires in it as the ATA 33 cable. Since we have ATA 66 drives, that's the cable I'm going to use to attach it. You'll notice the cables are color-coded, and that's for a reason. The blue end of the cable here, that's going to go to the motherboard, and these other two are for attaching to the drives. So these cables have gotten a little bit fancier than the old IDE cables. We now have to attach the blue directly to the motherboard. It is keyed, just as Patrick said, so you can't put it in wrong. And then one of these is going to go to my hard drive. I don't have two drives on this IDE chain. As I mentioned, every motherboard these days has two IDE connectors, each of which can handle two devices for a total of 4 IDE devices, hard drives, CDs, zip drives. In my case, I only have 2 IDE devices, a hard drive and a CD-ROM. And in order to make my machine more efficient, I'm going to put the hard drive on this cable, and I'm going to put the CD-ROM, which is a ATA 33 device, on this cable, and they won't share IDE chains. That gives me better performance. I'm putting it right in, and that's going to go to my hard drive. And then, isn't it nice when you do this before you've put in a lot of stuff? It makes it very easy to add these cables.
Where's the challenge in not having all the stuff in there?
This is the old style ATA 33 or UDMA 33 cable, and it doesn't matter which end you put in which side. So I usually put the one that has the longest length. This one will go on the motherboard, and then these two closer together ones will go to the drives themselves. This is going to go to my CD-ROM, which is the slower ATA 33 specification. Put that right in there. If you don't have keyed cables, as Patrick mentioned, the red line on the cable is the #1 wire that should go to the #1 pin of the connector.
Now, this is one of those areas where you get fancy when you're rounding the cables from one end of the system to the other. Remember, no sharp bends, no sharp breaks. Don't tie them into knots. Just be gentle. You can't fold them over flat to change directions, but try to do it once.
The floppy cables look very different than the IDE cables. The connectors are smaller, as Patrick observed, and there really is only, you know, they can't fit into the other cables. One thing to note with floppy cables, and Patrick got burned on this in that Build Your Own PC challenge, normally on the floppy cable, the red wire goes closest to the power supply, and that's true on all drives. The red wire, the #1 wire, is closest to the power supply, but not always. Patrick found a floppy drive that was the other way around, and that's what kept you from winning that race, isn't it?
It made me a little bitter.
They tricked you
today.
They tricked you. Patrick, for once, I'm finally beating you. I'm actually ready to put my power cables on.
Oh,
so while Patrick fiddles with his drives, moving it around so that he can get his stuff hooked up, we're going to show you how to hook up this stuff. These are all the power cables that come out of the power supply. And most of them, there's really 3 different kinds. Most of them look like this. These are the ones that are going to hook up to the hard drive and the CDs. There should be one that looks like that. That's the power supply cable that goes to the motherboard. And then there'll be 1 or 2 that look like this. These are for the floppy drives. Sometimes other devices use these kinds of power connectors, but typically hard drive, CD-ROM, floppy drive, and this is for the power supply. And then, by the way, my fans also use them. In fact, just in case, I bought a couple of extra these connectors, these extra splitter connectors that Patrick was talking about, so that I can make sure that all my fans are connected. So I'm going to put my motherboard, I'm going to wire it up. Now remember, this shouldn't be plugged in while you're doing this. I hope it hasn't been plugged in all along. This especially is a time as we start to connect the power up to these devices. You want to make sure that nothing is connected, that you have discharged any static electricity. You've been doing that all along, I'm sure. And we're going to put this power supply cable in. Only one way to do it. Only one way it'll fit. It's actually, you can't probably see it, but the connectors are shaped in such a way that they can only fit in one way. And this is a little clip that's going to snap right in there. I'm going to put it right in here. All right, I'm going to connect up here to my hard drive. You know, Patrick, you could tell me, maybe it's superstitious of me, but I don't like to have, when I have a situation like this with 1 cable and it's got 3 devices that I could connect up to it, I don't like to put all my devices on 1 wire.
Well,
you know
it's like putting all of your eggs in one basket.
Absolutely right.
Distribute it around. It may not make a difference, but you know what? Be a little superstitious.
Why take a chance?
Spread it around.
I'll tell you where you especially don't want to do that is with fans, because if, for instance, one of them dies, you don't want all of the fans to go out all at once.
That would be bad.
I like to keep some cooling going. So I'm going to put that one in my hard drive. It's rounded also on the corners here, so again, there's only one way to put this in. Most of the stuff, there's only one way to connect these things. There's only a few things like the floppy drive that will give you some leeway for error. And now you see, I really have a mess of spaghetti in here, and I'm going to really try to tidy this up, get this stuff out of the way so that there's a free flow of air through here and out of the case, and that this doesn't get in the way. What you really want to make sure is that there are no wires anywhere near fan blades, because what's going to happen? Well, the fan blade will eventually strip off the insulation, cause a short circuit. You could even have a fire in there, so be very careful about that. Make sure all these wires are well away from the fan blades, well away from anywhere they could get into trouble.
Take a look inside this case. Now, this is actually not too bad. We're still cleaning up the layout of the cables, but deep inside the Pentium 4 system we're building is an ATX connector. And just next to the ATX connector and half hidden by this cable here is an additional power connector. So it would probably behoove you to install, in this case, this particular machine, we normally don't do this, to install the power connectors first. But you know what? I'm just not smart enough to do that. So I'm going to pop that in place, and I've got my ATX connector, and just slide it right down in there until you get a nice firm connection.
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. I've checked all my cables. I got everything in here. I've actually used some twist ties, as we mentioned earlier, some of those special plastic ties, not, of course, the ones you get for garbage bags, but these electrical safe
Although
ties.
I've seen the garbage bag.
Not a good idea, I don't think, to get some of the cables out of the way so we got good free airflow. In fact, I feel so confident I even put one of the panels, not both.
Dude, you put both the panels on, I guarantee you're going to jinx yourself. You'll have to take something apart to make it boot.
So I just feel half confident, so I put one of the panels on. When I put it back, though, and I didn't replace it with the regular screws, I use these great thumb screws. It makes it very easy when I want to open the case at another time just to unscrew it. So and I'm going to do that with the other side. You ready for the moment of truth?
Let's do it.
All right, now that we got all the parts together, it's almost time to plug these babies in and start them up. Follow along with us, techtv.com/buildapc. Coming up next, we're going to show you how to plug in, boot up, configure your BIOS, and troubleshoot if things don't go exactly as planned. But first, let's recap. We've now installed the various cards we need inside the PC. We've connected them all up. We've installed a modem, and we attached the cables to that, and we've attached all the power cables inside. One cable we haven't attached yet, because it's the last thing you do, is the cable on the outside, the power supply to the plug. We'll do that, and then we're going to start it up. All right, now it's time to fire this puppy up and see if it actually works. This is the moment of truth. I'm so excited. We've got it all set up here. We've got our mouse and our keyboard, our power supply, our network interface. Shall we start it? That's the keyboard. That's going to go right into the keyboard connection there.
Usually these are actually color-coded. Green for the mouse, purple for the keyboard.
Well,
that's pictures on them.
One of the disadvantages of making your own PC is sometimes you don't have that. That, you know, this is something that if you bought a PC, you'd have a roadmap. But look, you know better because you built it. You know how it all goes.
Should we plug in an Ethernet or modem just for
I'll tell you why we're going to need Ethernet on this one. You need a net connection to install our operating system. We're going to install Windows XP today, and so when we install it, it's going to go out on the internet and say, "Here I am." I'm really nervous.
Hold on, ladies and gentlemen, just take a deep breath, relax. If it doesn't start up immediately,
it's not the end of the world.
We're going to do a little troubleshooting.
Troubleshooter.
And we'll fix it, okay?
Now, by the way, I'm leaving it open, and it's very important that you do the same, because I'm going to look, the first thing I'm going to look at when I press the power button is to see if these fans are operating. If they're not, I'm going to turn it off right away. I'm not going to fry my processor. So look, this is the most important fan, but look at all the other fans. Make sure the fans are operating. Go ahead, let's press this power button.
In 3, 2, 1.
All right, the fan's on. That's great. That fan's on. That fan's on. I'm feeling good. This is a good sign. Look, we got a boot up message on the screen. That's a very good start. Now we're going to go into the BIOS.
So we should tell the folks at home what the BIOS is, what this message is.
Okay, I'm looking at.
I want to call it, thanks to a novel I once read, the built-in operating system. It's the basic input-output system. It lives in the chipset inside the motherboard. It controls all the basic functions of the PC. When you hit that power switch, power goes into the motherboard, and the chipset wakes up, and it looks around and goes, okay, I got a graphics card, I got a hard drive, I'm a computer, I've got a chip, I've got memory. It goes through its own little checklist. Goes through the checklist, it sees everything at once, it's going to go to your hard drive and look for the operating system. If you don't have an operating system installed, which we don't yet, we haven't installed our operating system, it's just going to get a little upset because it's going to go, I haven't found an operating system, what's going on? But before you even get to that stage, you're going to change any settings you need to change in your BIOS.
For instance, I've disabled the onboard sound card because we put our own sound card in, and you might want to do things like that. This, as I said, you want to look at the hardware monitor. That's going to tell you if you'd set up everything and if the speed is correct, the CPU fan is running. And then I do need, in fact, to change on this machine, and I'm trying to find where to do that, the RAM speed and the bus speed on this.
Now, if we hadn't been able to get into the BIOS, folks, probably what would have happened is we either wouldn't have seen that. The first thing that shows up on the screen there is a little mini message from your graphics card. Then you get stuff from your motherboard. Here's what happens, though. If that doesn't work, remember how we told you how it was important to connect your speaker? Here's why. The power on self-test. It's called a post-test. If something's missing, the memory, the chip, the graphics board, what's going to happen is it's going to start beeping at you. It's going to sound like Morse code. Well, those codes, you write that down. It could be too short, too long, all these different codes. You go in your motherboard manual. It'll give you a list of those post codes, those power on self-test codes. It'll say, oh, your graphics card isn't working or your memory isn't working. Shut the machine down. Make sure the part it's looking for is properly installed, and away you go.
This system, to get into the BIOS setup, I press the delete key. It'll vary. You'll have to read the message when you first see the computer booting up. This is a screen. Look, we don't have an operating system installed on here, but we can get software to run. This is software that's built into the operating system. built into the hardware, I should say, that allows us to change some settings. One setting you're, of course, going to want to change right away is the date and time. It probably won't be set correctly, so let's get that set all right. We're going to be New Year's Day 2002, Back to the Future. Now I want to set the time as well. Normally it'll automatically detect all the different drives. You won't have to do anything. You do want to make sure that it sees the floppy drive. That's a very good sign. And it sees all the memory too. You can see over there on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got all the 256 megs of RAM we installed. We can look at some other features here. These are advanced features like what boots first. I'm going to change the first boot device right here to CD-ROM because we're going to install our operating system from CD-ROM. I'll also take a look at some of the other things. You can browse around. Be careful. Don't modify things willy-nilly. There's
if you don't know what you're changing, don't change it. If you do change it and it doesn't start up again, there's probably a little jumper on your motherboard that'll reset all this BIOS stuff back to the default. That will save you if you change something wrong.
Also, notice in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, F6 to load fail-safe defaults. That's another way to do it. Those are the default values that the system came with. If you press that button, if you're having trouble, F7 is worth trying. Those are the optimized defaults. In here, we can see things, our system health. Many BIOSes have this kind of information. You see our operating system, our CPU temperature is 105 degrees. That's very good, 105, 106.
It's a lot warmer than it was before.
It is. It's warmed up a little bit, but anything less than 130 or 140 is fine.
Okay.
We also see that our system temperature is good and that our fans are rotating at a high speed, just what we'd like. We've only got one fan monitor, that's the CPU fan. The other fans, the system fan and the power fan, did not plug into the motherboard, unfortunately. We also see that our clock speed is 100 megahertz. That's modifiable, as is the CPU multiplier. In this case, we did have to change it to 12 to get our full 1.2 gigahertz on our chip. You may have to change those settings, but as Patrick says, don't modify anything if you don't know what you're doing. Once you've got it the way you want it, go to Save and Exit and press Return, and you're going to save your settings. We've got it all set up. Well, now what do we do?
It's time to install the operating system, Leo. This is the part of your computer you stare at every day. The operating system, it could be Windows 98, Windows 2000, it could be Linux, it could be all sorts of stuff. We're going to install that fancy new operating system,
Windows XP. Now this will install off the CD. It'll actually boot up the system from the CD. So we set the settings in our BIOS to boot from CD. We're going to put the operating system CD in there, and I'm going to exit my BIOS, saving the changes. And if all goes well, if I can see the CD and everything, which I think I feel good about, I think I might be able to, Windows XP's install screen will come up, and we'll actually start installing the operating system.
Hey,
there it is.
Setup is inspecting your computer's hardware configuration, and away you go, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, it's a brand new hard drive in here, a nice big hard drive, but because it's brand new, it's never been partitioned. That is, it's never been prepared for an operating system.
So we got to tell it what it's going to be.
This doesn't scare Windows XP. It sees the hard drive and it says it's unpartitioned. I need to create a partition by pressing C, and I can tell it how big it should be. Do you want to use the whole hard drive as one partition? You can. In this case, I'm going to create a partition of about 6 gigs for
just for the operating
system? Just for the operating system, and then I'm going to create another partition of about let's say 10 gigs for my programs.
Wow.
I'm kind of fancy.
What
and
about
then
your
I'm going to create
all your files and your MP3s.
I'm going to create a data disk of 5 gigs for just regular documents, and I'm going to use the rest of the unpartitioned space, in this case 37 gigabytes for media files. That's what really eats up a hard drive. Now, I've said I want to install the operating system on the first partition. I'm going to use, because it's XP, I'm going to use the NTFS file system, and I'm going to format. Let's do the quick format, see if it'll let me. Probably won't, because it's never been formatted before. Oh, it might. It's going to format the drive. That's the second stage in preparing a drive for use. Partitioning divides the drive up into virtual drives. Formatting, it's like writing lines on a pad. It's preparing the drive for writing data on it. And now we're formatting the disks so that we can install the operating system. And we're ready to copy the files over. This is going to take a while to do. So while it's doing that, let me just recap the final steps of actually building a personal computer. We've attached our peripherals. We've configured the BIOS. We've installed an operating system. And before you do that, of course, you partition and format the hard drives. We've actually kind of skipped ahead here. And we have Windows XP. It's installed all of its files. It's now just asking us for some simple configuration information. This should be very simple. You built this. You know all this stuff. Just follow the wizard, complete the form, and you're ready. Your computer is done. You're ready to install the software. Good work. Wow, I can't believe it. We're just going to let this finish up.
Yeah.
You have built your own PC. Congratulations! Now turn off this tape and go enjoy it, okay?
Okay, hold on. Before you do that, if you got
right.
stuck anywhere along the way, or if you just need a little more information, go right to our website, techtv.com/build-a-PC. We got a ton of additional help, some articles, and all kinds of good stuff there just for you.
Well, that's not all that's there.
Yeah.
We also recommend other offerings from the great Tech TV Q series. Our video, for instance, Tech TV Solves Your Computer Problems, as well as some great books, including Tech TV's Upgrading Your PC. You just built it, now you're going to upgrade it, featuring my buddy here, Patrick Norton.
Even better, Poor Leo's 2002 Computer Almanac, where the man himself gets folksy on your computer.
Everything you ever wanted to know about your computer and then some. We do thank you so much for buying and watching this video. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Leo Laporte.
I'm Patrick Norton.
And we're done.
Woohoo!
See you on TV. Bye-bye. Let's go mess with your computer now. I think we got to fix it.